I never shirked my responsibilities ever in this family. I was there, I was always there, and I gave 110% every time. I felt like I wasn't getting that from the rest of my family. I got 3 ex-wives who are going, Kody changed, Kody changed.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most jaw-dropping, head-shaking episodes of Sister Wives. And let me tell you, this one is peak Kody and Robyn. We're talking fake tears, blame games, and Robyn's uncanny ability to twist reality until Kody actually believes he's the victim. Buckle up, because this is wild. The Arizona desert, which had been the site of so much conflict and broken promises, was covered in deep shadows as the sun sank low. Kody and Robyn eventually signed the documents after years of discussion, disagreements, and dashed hopes. They owned Coyote Pass. There was a buzz of excitement around their house. After so much turmoil, the conclusion ought to have been a time of triumph and stability. But rather than happiness, there was an odd weight to the gathering. When guests arrived, they were expecting a party, but what happened was quite different. Standing in front of them, Kody's eyes were moist with unreal tears and his voice was quivering. He talked about his kids, the growing distance between them, and the connections that seemed to deteriorate with every year that went by. His comments portrayed him as a man shattered by tragedy, but the sadness and weeping seemed contrived. Then Robyn arrived. She took a step closer, her tone calming, her presence steady. She assured Kody calmly that he was not to blame for any of this. She argued that the ex-wives were to blame. The kids had been poisoned against their father by Christine, Janelle, and Mary. The children withdrew from him because they no longer desired to be around him. As Robyn's words enveloped him like a shield, Kody listened and nodded, his tears lessening. The closure of Coyote Pass at that time had nothing to do with land or property. Rewriting the tale of a broken family was the goal. Additionally, Robyn made sure Kody understood that he was the victim rather than the cause with her calm certain. As guests settled in, the hum of discussion filled the living area, which was pleasant with the glow of gentle lights. As Kody took center stage, the laughter subsided and plates of food remained untouched on the counters. What was supposed to be a celebration of fresh starts soon turned into something completely different. As he spoke, Kody's voice broke and his words were filled with grief. He informed the group that the relationships he had once treasured had broken down, that his kids had become aloof, and that they no longer desired to be with him. His face twisted and his eyes sparkled, yet the tears felt empty, as if practiced for impact instead of being the result of genuine suffering. The visitors looked at each other nervously, not sure whether to console him or say nothing. Everyone's ears were tuned to Kody's sorrow as the celebration atmosphere gave way to a somber gathering. He portrayed himself as a man misinterpreted, a father abandoned, and a victim of uncontrollable circumstances. Then Robyn was there as usual. With a composed voice and a commanding presence, she leaned in. She assured Kody that he was not to blame for the kids' rejection. She argued that the children were being turned against their father by the ex-wives, who were talking poison into their brains. It was Christine, Janelle, and Mary who created this barrier, not him. Kody's shoulders relaxed and his weeping subsided. He was protected from the pain of responsibility by Robyn's words, which enveloped him like armor. The celebration, which was supposed to be a turning point, had become a platform for accusation and denial. Kody made the decision to accept Robyn's account of events at that precise moment. Silence had descended upon the room following Kody's performance. His comments appeared to have more weight than the tears themselves, even though they remained in the air. He sat hunched over, hoping someone would reassure him that he wasn't the antagonist of his own tale. Robyn approached, her voice steady and quiet, her presence intentional. Speaking with the assurance of someone who thought she knew the truth, she leaned forward. With her eyes fixed on his, she said, "This isn't your fault. It's them. Janelle, Christine, and Mary. They have been planting ideas, whispering to the children, and inciting them to turn against you." The pain of rejection was eased by her words, which poured like a salve. Kody's shoulders relaxed, his breathing slowed, and the pain on his face turned to relief. He needed to believe her, and he wanted to. The partygoers around them observed the change. What had started out as a father's lament was now a meticulously constructed story that was updated in real time. The responsibility shifted when Robyn's whisper turned into Kody's reality. The ex-wives, the handy antagonists in a narrative Robyn was desperate to dominate, now bore the entire burden instead of him. The atmosphere was tense and the celebration had changed into something darker. Now, instead of sobbing, Kody sat silently, staring at Robyn as if she had the answers he so desperately needed. Robyn's calm, confident voice filled the room. She described the kids as victims of manipulation rather than as unique people experiencing their own suffering. She said that the stories the ex-wives had whispered had turned them against their father. She identified each of them individually, portraying Christine, Janelle, and Mary as the creators of division. According to Robyn, the kids were no longer just alienated. They were manipulated, altered, and forced to perceive their father as someone he wasn't. She portrayed them as villains in Kody's tale, not because of their own decisions, but rather because of the concepts ingrained in their minds. As he listened, Kody's expression softened and his sorrow gave way to outrage. Robyn's comments gave him a new foe to battle, and the pain of rejection subsided. The kids hadn't left because of his shortcomings, carelessness, or absence. No, it was a plot hatched by the women he had previously called wives, a betrayal from within the family. Thus, the story Robyn whispered into their father's ear turned the kids into the antagonists of the story at that precise moment, rather than via their own voices. Kody used to stand in a very different setting, the demanding special forces environment, far from the serene desert of Arizona. There, uncomfortable and encircled by strangers, he encountered difficulties that required candor. And he gave it for a moment. Kody revealed what he had long shied away from at home in front of cameras and other recruits. He talked about his family and the rifts that had grown throughout it, and he declared something no one had anticipated. He was to blame. He acknowledged that, as the family's head, he was accountable for its demise. Unvarnished and raw, his voice bore the weight of reality, offering a rare sight of accountability from a man who so frequently avoided taking responsibility. It was shocking to those who were watching. Here was Kody, devoid of justifications, admitting that his decisions, carelessness, and shortcomings had strained his relationship with his kids. It was an epiphany, a break in the armor his pride was so carefully wrapped in. However, that admission was limited to the Special Forces community. The truth he had uttered started to disappear as soon as the cameras stopped filming and the desert silence reappeared. Robyn waited to change the tale when the man who had taken responsibility in front of strangers returned home. After his absence, Kody was greeted with the quiet of the desert, but the insight he had gained about Special Forces did not endure the trip. The guy who had earlier acknowledged his mistakes and spoken accountability with uncommon candor returned to his home and Robyn's waiting arms. With the weight of his confession still in his voice, she listened as he described what he had said. Before the narrative could settle, Robyn's tone hardened and her eyes narrowed. With careful words and unwavering conviction, she told him, "You're not to blame. It's the kids. The ex-wives are to blame. Everything has been corrupted by them." Kody's guilt-ridden shoulders started to loosen. Robyn's assurance eased the load he had carried in front of strangers. His admission that he had let his family down vanished, to be replaced by a much more palatable story. There was no responsibility in the house. The man who had before confronted his own mirror head-on now clung to Robyn's account of what had happened. And with her whisper, the revelation that had sounded so potent vanished into thin air, destroyed by the narrative she maintained was true. Robyn's steady voice and quiet chatter had taken the place of the celebration, which had long since faded into a strange rhythm. Her comments appeared to explain everything as she spoke with conviction. She claimed that after a divorce, adults might sway their children's opinions and turn them against the other parent. There was something harsher behind her calm, almost matter-of-fact tone. She was disclosing a reality that she was well aware of, not only a potential scenario. Robyn seemed to be disclosing personal information to those who paid careful attention, She had been in a similar situation years before, helping her own kids navigate the turmoil of being apart from Preston Jessup. He had been portrayed by her as being absent, heartless, and a man who had deserted them. She related tales of unpaid assistance, maltreatment, and a father who refused to see his children. Because she was their mother and her voice was authoritative, the kids trusted her. Her comments had the same weight now that she was speaking to Kody. She said that Christine, Janelle, and Mary had turned their kids against their father by whispering to them, just as she had done in the past. And Kody clung to her story, searching for an explanation. Robyn disclosed more than she meant to at that very moment. Her confidence came from experience rather than conjecture. She had personally used influence, so she was aware of its potency. Preston Jessup was another man whose name lingered in the background of Robyn's story long before she emerged as the main character in Kody's world. Even though he lived in peace in Montana, far away from the turmoil and the cameras, Robyn's story nevertheless included his presence. She used harsh language when discussing him, portraying him as an absent and heartless father. She informed her kids that Preston had deserted them, failed to provide for them, and prioritized distance over affection. According to her account, he was a man who had abandoned her, leaving her to bear the responsibility on her own. However, there was a different reality hidden beneath those words. The story she told was unsupported by any government records, police investigations, or court judgments of abuse. Only her voice contained the allegations, which she repeated until her children believed them to be true. For his part, Preston resisted the narrative. He charged Robyn with manipulation, poisoning the kids against him, and fabricating falsehoods to break the father-child tie. Robyn's insistence that the story was true overwhelmed his protests. And now, years later, the ghosts of Robyn's history were there as she whispered to Kody about ex-wives manipulating kids against their father. Because she had used influence before, she was aware of its potency. That was demonstrated by Preston Jessup, a man who was eliminated by Robyn's narrative rather than by his own deeds. Robyn's tales about Preston Jessup were compelling and were told so frequently that her kids came to believe them. She talked of their father's abandonment, cruelty, and neglect. However, the proof was nowhere to be seen when the curtain was drawn. There were no court documents that supported her allegations, no police reports hidden in dusty archives, and no judge who had ever found against Preston for the crimes she had accused him of. Her remarks were drowned out by the court system's silence. She had never once reported abuse or violence. The courts had never once found him guilty of the image she painted. The lack of evidence was glaring. It exposed a narrative based on repetition rather than facts, on how a mother's voice shapes her children's thinking. Robyn's story overshadowed Preston's objections and his conviction that he had been harmed. The irony was evident when, years later, she confided in Kody about ex-wives turning children against their fathers. She knew how it operated, so she spoke confidently. It was something she had done before. The missing evidence was a mirror reflecting the precise strategies she accused others of employing, not merely a void in the past. Robyn's story had long since overpowered Preston Jessup's voice, but his comments continued to reverberate in the background like an unwanted echo. He had charged her of distorting reality, inciting their kids against him, and poisoning their minds with whispers and half-truths. He saw it as erasure rather than abandonment. A father cut off from his children's life due to his influence. Growing up, Robyn's kids thought their father was dangerous, unreliable, and uncaring. Preston, however, maintained that none of it was accurate. He said he had been shoved aside, refused entry, and accused of things that never happened in court, never came up in police records, and never had any supporting evidence. His objections were subdued in comparison to Robyn's assurance, but they exposed a distinct aspect of the situation, one in which the relationship had been broken by manipulation rather than neglect. Years later, Robyn sat next to Kody and informed him that Mary, Janelle, and Christine had all committed the same crime. She said that by feeding their kids tales that portrayed him as the antagonist, they had poisoned them against him. Desperate for an explanation, Kody took her word for it. The irony was biting, almost brutal. Robyn utilized the same charges that Preston had previously used against her to absolve Kody of any responsibility. She now stated that others were doing to him what she had previously done, and in that instant, the manipulation cycle was repeated, although with different terminology but the same consequences. It was hard to overlook the contrast. Robyn's children, whom she had brought into her marriage to Kody, had a secure life. Their health insurance was covered, their requirements were satisfied, and Kody's assistance made their lives easier. They received financial support, care, and protection in ways that suggested stability. However, the situation was very different outside Robyn's house. The children of Janelle and Christine had not had the same safety net. Kody had not consistently provided financial support, had not paid for their health insurance, had failed to take on the obligations that came with being their parent. They had experienced neglect and absence in place of the hollow promises of caring. The hypocrisy was obvious. Robyn had previously criticized her ex-husband for not being able to support his children. She was standing next to Kody, who had done the same thing to his other kids. The distinction was straightforward. The others were left on their own, while her children were shielded. The unbalance became apparent in the silence of that realization. While the other of his children suffered from being ignored, Robyn's family prospered under Kody's care. Nevertheless, she stood up for him, claiming that the mothers who had raised those kids by themselves were to blame rather than him. The silence of what had not been done, rather than words, conveyed the truth of Kody's obligations. For years, Christine and Janelle struggled to raise their kids without the consistent financial assistance of the guy who called himself their dad. Everyday necessities, health insurance, and educational costs were entirely their responsibility, and Kody stayed far away. The reality didn't change until the courts got involved. A judge mandated that Kody pay child support for Christine's youngest kid, Truly. It was required by law, not voluntarily or out of love. The payment started, but it seemed like an empty gesture, a responsibility performed under duress rather than out of a father's heart. There was nothing for the other kids. No financial assistance, no insurance, and no recognition of the hardship their mothers faced on their own. Kody might have said something, but the silence spoke louder. However, things were different at Robyn's house. The same man who had ignored the others took care of her children, provided their wants, and supported their life. There was no denying the inequity, which was deeply ingrained in the family. The reality of child support involved more than just money. It was about acknowledgement, accountability, and the distinction between being a parent in name and acting like one. And the Brown family's divisions widened much more in that split. It was hard to overlook the inconsistencies in Robyn's universe. At one point, she had been adamant in her criticism of her ex-husband, accusing him of not supporting his children, failing to care for them, and being away from them when they most needed him. He was portrayed by her as a man unfit to be called father. However, she lived in a different world next to Kody. His disregard for Janelle's and Christine's children was dismissed, justified, and even justified. It didn't seem to matter if he didn't have health insurance, didn't pay child support, or remained silent when his kids needed him. Robyn didn't confront him or hold him responsible. Rather, she defended him, claiming that someone else was to blame. Kody's ability to protect and care for her own children became the benchmark. They had stability, financial support, and insurance. Robyn also permitted herself to think that Kody was doing enough since they were safe. The others, who were left behind, were merely victims of a story she would not accept. It was a deep-seated double standard. In the present, what had been unacceptable in the past was now permissible. The husband she now defended was a reflection of the man she had earlier denigrated for being careless. The reality about Robyn's loyalty became apparent in that contradiction. It was to the narrative she had to defend, not to justice or fairness. The reality of Robyn's power became apparent in the silent aftermath of the celebration. Kody was sitting more calmly now, a fragile certainty taking the place of his earlier tears, and it was obvious whose voice had led him there. Robyn's assurances had become his shelter, and her words had become the script he followed. She had meticulously pieced together the tale until Kody completely believed it. His decisions, his absence, or his carelessness were not the reasons his kids were rejecting him. No, they were manipulated, poisoned by the ex-wives, and turned against him by uncontrollable forces. Robyn made sure he heard only this story, which cleared him. Her belief was unwavering, and her presence was steady. She prevented him from carrying the burden of duty and from lingering in remorse. Rather, she rebuilt and redirected his pain, giving it new adversaries to battle. And Kody gave up to her version of events out of desperation for solace. Robyn was more than a wife at that very moment. She was the story's puppet master, controlling Kody's emotions and making sure he was never affected by accountability. The illusion persisted in their home, even as the family's divisions grew more severe. Kody believed the concept that Robyn had planted because she needed him too. Instead of celebrating the end of the night at Coyote Pass, the reality was quietly rewritten. Kody sat in the shadows, Robyn's brittle consolation taking the place of his previous weeping. He now carried a story of betrayal rather than failure, one in which he was the victim rather than the cause. His children had turned against him, and his ex-wives had poisoned their minds. Robyn's unwavering, steady voice lingered in the atmosphere. She had sowed the seed, fostered it, and seen Kody accept it wholeheartedly. Accountability has no place in her interpretation of events. The family's divisions resulted from other people's manipulation rather than from neglect or absence. Desperate for solace, Kody trusted her. The hush that ensued revealed the larger picture. This was more than just a party or a tearful moment. It was a window into the relationship that characterized them. Kody is the man who gave up his truth for hers, clinging to the solace of responsibility moved elsewhere. Robyn as the shield, the storyteller, the one who constructed reality. Outside their gates, the family was still broken, the kids far away, the ex-wives bearing the burden of rebuilding their lives without him. However, on the inside, Kody and Robyn clung to the myth they had crafted together, in which she was the voice that made him innocent. Let us know in your comments. And stay tuned by subscribing our channel to get more updates like this. Thanks everyone.